Welcome back. You're watching Network Africa on Channels Television. After almost a week of chaos and confusion, Burkina Faso's interim president Michel Kafando says he's back in charge and civilian rule has been restored. This development came as coup leader General Govt went to welcome several African leaders arriving to oversee the transfer of power. His presidential guard agreed to a deal overnight with the regular army to avoid violence. They pledged to return to barracks and the army to withdraw from the capital. The presidential guard is loyal to Blaise Compaoré, and that was the country's long-time ruler who was ousted in a popular uprising last year. The elite troops installed General Diendere as the leader last week, a month before elections had been due in the landlocked country. At least 10 people have been killed and more than 100 injured in clashes between the RSP and protesters. Well, for more on this wonderful development in Burkina Faso, we go live to the capital where the Voice of America's Emily Yob is standing by. Emily, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, since you're on ground, I must ask you, is it true what we're hearing? Are things actually back to normal in Burkina Faso?
Well, not yet, but it's getting there. This morning, a delegation from West African leader from the ECOWAS arrived, 6 head of states, to try also to negotiate the end of the crisis. They've just, right as I'm speaking, they're just exiting the building. And the ceremony to hand over power to Michel Kafando, the interim president, has just finished. So he's back in charge. The transition government is back in charge. So the next few days are going to be also interesting to follow.
Indeed, it will be a very interesting 2 days to follow. But how are the people of Burkina Faso reacting to this development now that things are on the way back to normalcy, on the path back to normalcy, I should say?
Well, that's what I was saying, that the next few days are going to be interesting, because this morning there were still some protesters in the streets protesting against some issues that haven't been addressed yet, like the amnesty of the putschists. This still hasn't been addressed by any TV. So there's going to be a point that is going to have to be solved by the next government, as well as the dissolution of the presidential guard. So these are still key issues that still have to be addressed, and part of the populations are still expecting it to be addressed.
Now, I was just going to ask you if the ceremony had been concluded, but you just said it has. That means basically you've told us everything we need to know. Emily, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you very much.
The Voice of America's Emily Yob reporting from the capital of Burkina Faso. Now, another sit-tight president is in the making in Congo. The president of the Republic of Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso, has announced a referendum on changes to the constitution that could allow him to run for a third term in office in elections next year. The 71-year-old, who has ruled oil-producing Congo for 31 years in 2 separate spells in office, is banned by the current constitution from seeking another term. However, he called a national forum in July to discuss reforms, including raising the maximum age for presidential candidates and scrapping the 2-term limit, feeding expectations. And he will seek to extend his rule in polls come next year. The president is one of a number of veteran African leaders who have sparked controversy with plans to extend their time in office through constitutional changes. Speaking of third terms, Burundi now has another feather added to its cap of embarrassment. It is officially being referred to as the hungriest nation on earth. You would have noticed that we took our time on yesterday's edition of the program to look at the economic situation in the East African country. This is clearly indicative of the fact that term extensions is a bad idea, and analysts say that countries like the Republic of Congo need to learn lessons from Burundi. Burundi's economy, which is often overlooked, is central to understanding the backdrop of the most severe crisis which the country has had since the end of the 1993 to 2005 civil war. Speaking of war, an increase in attacks by Boko Haram is said to have uprooted as many as 500,000 children over the past 5 months, bringing the total number of children on the run in northeast Nigeria and neighboring countries to about 1.4 million. Humanitarian agencies say more support is urgently needed for the thousands of refugees and internally displaced people who continue to flee from the sect.
Continue to have their lives altered by the Boko Haram sect, with the United Nations Children Agency having estimated that the number of children who have been displaced by the group stands at 1.4 million. In the last 5 months alone, around 500,000 were displaced after a sharp rise in attacks by the Islamist jihadi group. The militants have been waging a 6-year insurgency to establish an Islamist state in the northeast of Nigeria that has killed thousands and displaced 2.1 million people, most of whom are children. The largest concentration of internally displaced persons, and therefore children, are in camps or host communities in Borno state capital, Maiduguri, the birthplace of the insurgency.
If you can see the level of damage that Boko Haram is causing to our people, you wonder why are they doing this? Because there isn't any motive behind creating such mayhem on your own people.
Meanwhile, aid agencies say the renewed Boko Haram attacks have created a major hunger crisis in Africa's Lake Chad region, with malnutrition reaching a catastrophic levels in some areas. The World Food Programme is appealing for $16.3 million to deal with immediate needs in Chad, Niger and Cameroon, where hundreds of thousands of people are displaced and 750,000 are going hungry.
The people here have fled the islands because they have seen the parents or their children being killed by Boko Haram, and they had no other option. Now they are here, they have nothing, and they need our support. WFP is here. We are providing food to about 2,000 people today, but the needs are growing and we need more and more support.
More than 51,000 people who normally fish and farm on fertile islands in Lake Chad have fled their homes in recent weeks following attacks by the militants who have massacred villages and looted crops and livestock. WFP says people have planted crops on the islands but could not risk returning to harvest them. Many lost their livelihoods when Chad banned fishing on the lake for security reasons, and the conflict shut down cross-border trade with Nigeria.
And just a reminder of our top story now. We are pleased to report that Egypt's president has pardoned 2 of the Al Jazeera journalists, that's Mohamed Fahmy and Bahir Mohamed. A presidential spokesman confirmed that the Canadian and Egyptian are on a list of 100 prisoners to be released later. And on that note, here is our question of the day. We're asking you your thoughts on what's happening in Burkina Faso as regards the return to civilian rule. Feel free to send us your feedback either via email or Twitter. The address and handle are right there on your screen. As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching Network Africa right here on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are.